Well, welcome everybody. I'm Stuart Schaefer. I'm the chair of the Cincinnati P&G Alumni, and excited you're here. We're really trying hard to get back into the habit of mingling, but we learned a new skill last year, and that was webinars and videos. So we want to continue to do both. So please send us, you've got our contact info, comments after the fact, encouragement, thoughts for ideas, etc. Meredith Myers is going to introduce you. Meredith has kind of put all this together, worked with Peg, the glue that's making all this possible. So, and Meredith will do the introduction. So, Meredith.
So I have the pleasure of introducing Peg Wyant. We have a really special opportunity tonight to hear from the woman who, as Meg Whitman said, is the woman who opened the doors that the rest of us were all able to walk through, which feels very true. From being the first woman to lead in so many ways at P&G, to starting her own venture fund, to running a very successful commercial real estate business, she's looked at challenges throughout her career and said, yeah, I can do that, no problem. And then she figured out how to do it. I mean, it was. I feel like when I finished this book, I felt empowered to do the same. So I think that was a really important message coming out of here. She's going to tell you tonight that she had many advantages that helped her get to this place and be successful. But the reality is that level of courage and the bold decision making that you're going to hear about throughout her career feels really singular. Her story also, as I read One Red Shoe, feels like a story of personal accountability and responsibility. She looked at challenges throughout her career and figured out how to jump over those barriers, not complaining, not stepping aside, but how to go over, around, through, etc. And she did that in her career and in her life. As someone who's currently thinking about the Playroom a lot, her rules for the boardroom and the Playroom still feel really relevant today, many years later. I feel like I took plenty away from reading that list that I think she delivered, I don't know how many years ago, but it still feels very relevant. And she and her husband, Jack, have 4 very successful children, so I feel like that shows us something. She knew how to get that right. I'm hoping I can do the same someday, Peg. So today we're going to have the opportunity to hear her story and to hear from her about the past, present, and future of P&G. And we should have plenty of time for questions at the end, so please be thinking about what you'd like to ask Peg. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Peg Wyant.
Thank you, Meredith and Stuart, and thank you all for coming. It is a real pleasure to be here. Procter & Gamble is very special to me, as it is to probably everybody in this room, but I got a lot of things from Procter, including my husband, Jack, my mentor, John Pepper. I got my business partner, a woman who worked for me, Kathy Meyer, for 40 years, and vast majority of my close friends. And once more, I got whatever modicum of discipline that I have, and being an Irish girl, that says a lot. It came from P&G. So, without further ado, I'll tell you I wrote a book called One Red Shoe, which was published this year. Where's the clicker? Oh, there, right in front of me.
It's a very
It doesn't look like it. Thank you, Meredith. And I wrote it because I thought that we made a ton of progress in the first 20 years of my career, from the late 60s until 1980, with women and race and all kinds of things. And for a lot of reasons, it seems to have stalled. So I kind of thought, maybe my stories, just maybe, they might help. And so I decided to write this book. Let's start at the beginning. When I got out of college, well, it's a little bit before that. When I got out of college, I went back to Congress where I'd worked the previous summer on a Ford Foundation grant and tried to get a job. They didn't hire women. So I started my own company, and I ran it for a year and did quite well in terms of the product. It was taking high school kids to Europe. But I ran out of money. So I came back home to get a job, and home was Cincinnati, Ohio. And I took a bus downtown one day and arrived at Procter & Gamble thinking I could work there. And of course, being a Cincinnati native, I knew a lot of people at Procter & Gamble. And I walked in to what I learned was the secretarial office, and met this very nice lady behind the desk. And she said, fill out the application, and then I'll give you the typing test. And I thought, I don't think so. I said, I'll fill out the application, but I don't type. I don't want to type. All I can do is think. Don't you have a test for that? And for some reason, this otherwise middle-aged, what appeared to be a bureaucratic woman, decided to break the rules, and she gave me that test. I took the test, and apparently I did well, and I had all the other credentials. I had good academics. I was a leader. I was an athlete. And all the boxes you could check, except the one that I was a girl. So they didn't know what to do with me. And they called a young brand manager named John Pepper and asked him to take me to lunch. And John took me to lunch, and he came back, and he said, I look like a child, don't I? And he said, tell me once again why it is we don't hire women. And that is the single question that changed corporate America, because there was no answer. So I got a shot at the place. But I want to tell you what it was like walking into Procter & Gamble for the first time. And I'll start that by reading a passage from my book, which should be marked. Bear with me here. Okay. My first day, February 6, 1967, I was assigned to Bold, a new brand in PS&D. There were 4 men on the brand, a secretary, and me. At noon on day 1, the men left to go to lunch, and they all went off together into the company cafeteria. With no invitation for me, I invited my secretary. That afternoon, the Ivory Snow brand manager from across the room motioned with his index finger for me to come into his office. And then he said, don't ever do that again. We don't fraternize with the help. For the next several months, not wanting to eat alone, I didn't go to lunch, dropping to about 100 pounds. Nobody noticed. Every day, I would listen to my boss and his friends talk about Ohio State football or the newest advertising campaign as they walked by my desk. Until they turned the corner toward the elevator, I would put my head down in order to appear focused on a memo, to avoid having to confront the fact that I was invisible to them. I still can't read that without choking up a bit, because it was hard. But Meredith asked me in advance, what were the things you couldn't do? So I decided to make a list. The first was no lunch. The second was no security clearance after dark, no upward mobility, no sales training, no pregnancies. If you got pregnant, you were asked to leave. And you were literally asked to leave and not expected to come back. No babies, no child care, no affirmative action, no family leave, no sexual harassment policies or prohibitions, no gender equality laws, no shame in stealing ideas or speaking over a softer voice, no leash on the bad boys with alcohol, drugs, roaming hands, switchblades, and guns. And there were a few. I could tell you stories about each one of those. And so you were kind of on your own. But despite that, there were all kinds of things. As Meredith mentioned, I had lots of advantages in life. I grew up on a 600-acre farm. My father was brilliant, and I have to take a moment to give him a tip of the hat, because this is his 112th birthday. And a badass mom. And to give you some idea what she was like, she was an independent thinker, an independent woman. She didn't work for a living. People didn't, women didn't at all back then. But she taught us all that you could do anything and be anything. But the thing that influenced maybe most of all was when I was 15, we went to Michigan and stayed at a little hotel. And one night we were leaving the hotel to go down to dinner, and had a taxi there waiting to go. And she spied off to the right a wedding reception. And Mom said, oh, no need to go to dinner. We'll just go there. At 15, you can imagine, I was completely and utterly mortified. And I said, Mom, we can't do that. We weren't invited. And she said, the only reason I wasn't invited is they don't know me yet. The only reason I wasn't invited is they don't know me yet. So kind of along the way, every time I saw a no entrance, I thought, well, they don't really mean that. They just don't know me yet. So I would plow ahead. Diversity of thought at the dinner table. We had dinner every single night at 6:30 precisely, and there were no interruptions, no telephones, no interruptions of any sort. You never could get out of it. I grew up in a half Catholic, half Protestant family, half Democrat, half Republican, half Welsh, half Irish. And you can imagine the discussions at the table were spirited. And I got my voice at that table because you had to stand up for yourself. Confidence. The confidence came from athletics. Well, girls' school education, first of all, but I also was an athlete. I was a competitive tennis player. I rode horses. And that knocks the fear out of you pretty quickly if you're not a natural rider. And I played squash. And I had a very supportive husband from the beginning. Hats off, Jack. Oh, that's nice. You're getting a round of applause.
Did you notice how loud the applause was?
Yes, it's louder than anything I've gotten. And but I was able to make progress in the 60s and the 70s with a few other women that came along the way. There weren't any for 5 or 6 years, but then a few did. And I became the first woman on a whole bunch of things, and we don't have to read all of those, but they broke a lot of barriers. That was the point. And the point was that the barriers were broken, and I think a large reason, or a huge reason, was the leadership at the time. I mean, the kind of men pictured in this picture don't come around very often. And every time I raised my hand and said, hey, I'd like to go on sales training. I know the law says you can't lift 20 pounds or more. I couldn't lift a case, but I'd like to try. And the answer was, we'll work hard for a year and we'll see where it goes. And if you do well, we'll get you a promotion and we'll send you. And if not, we'll give you your walking papers and send you away. And you'll never be sorry for having worked on the fast track at Procter & Gamble for a year. So that's what we did. And then when I wanted to be a group products manager, they said you could try it. When I got pregnant, the policy was you had to leave at 4 months. And I said, I don't think I have to. I don't feel bad. Why should I have to leave? That is so ludicrous in retrospect. But they let me try. And that was true all along the way. And throughout that, I was a very independent thinker. We'll get to that. But partially because nobody ever took me to lunch. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. So you don't know what you're supposed to do. You break the rules almost naturally. And so along came the opportunity. In 1979, John Smale was president. He was not CEO, but he was looking for someone, as he said, I'm looking for someone to help me figure out what Procter & Gamble should be in the next millennium. In the 70s, Procter's performance was less than stellar, and he knew he had to change the rules of the game. And I was one of the people he interviewed. I was younger and less striped than all the others, but I did have this reputation. And he called me up, and I said, after I went back, I wrote him a note and said, thank you very much for the interview. And I was sure he wouldn't pick me anyway, but the answer is no. I turned him down 2 times, and if I had written a script for how I got the offer when somebody was looking for an independent thinker, I don't think I could have planned it better, because he called me up and he said, what do I need to do to get you to agree? There were a lot of yes men around, and John didn't want a yes man. And so I said, well, I can't necessarily get here at 8:30 if there's a snowstorm and my nanny doesn't show up. So we agreed, and I had the job opportunity of a lifetime. Different ways of thinking. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of being an outsider and thinking a little differently. And one was the very first brand assignment, where Jack, the one who got all the applause, worked for me, which is how we met. He doesn't tell everybody that, but but that was the case. Anyway, Bonus was a brand that packed a towel inside, and it was a free premium, and it was kind of popular in its day in the South, and it had become very unpopular. And that was my first brand. And so I did everything to try to make it better, including trying to sell it as you can dress up, make clothes, fashionable clothes, in these towels. I mean, how ludicrous is that? Well, that didn't work, no surprise. And then I recommended, well, why don't we shut down this brand? It doesn't make any money, and if we shut it down, a lot of the business will go to Tide, which is a lot more profitable. And I got my wrist slapped for that. Your job is to build the business and don't worry about profit. It was to build the revenue. That was the job of a brand person. So that was my first experience with real independent thinking, but it didn't affect me very much. Gain was one. When I was a new group products manager, Gain was in trouble, and I'd just been on baby leave with our daughter, and I came back, and we had been launched as a enzyme stain removal brand. But after about a year, the company was very afraid that Tide, which was sort of stable at the time, would be hurt by the absence of enzymes. So they decided to give enzymes to Tide. And that took away Gain's reason for being. So we started a very steep decline. And I frankly didn't have any idea how I would correct that. But I knew if I went through the normal policies and procedures and steps, it would not happen, not at least in my lifetime. So I went to management in order. There was Gar Lochbeach was head of advertising, Sandy Weiner, Tom Lako. They were all there in the chain of command, and I said, I can do this, but I need a couple of things. I first of all need the best brand manager we can find. Tom Hertzkovitz, I wanted him moved from another brand, and I got that. And then I said, I want everybody to get out of my way for 90 days. I need 90 days and total and complete freedom to do whatever I want. In retrospect, that's ludicrous to think that the company that literally approved every line on every package, and during that time we changed advertising agencies, we converted the brand from stain removal to fragrance, because the only asset the brand had really was that the fragrance smelled really good. We added speckles and to suggest to the consumer that the fragrance was intensified, and the speckles were added to show that there was fragrance. And we added the package, made it so freshening brand, and then launched this new thing. Much to my enormous pleasure, that brand is now on exactly the same strategy, and it's $1 billion brand. So, but maybe the management should hear that story, actually, because if you let people, the young people with talent and entrepreneurial spirit go, who knows what could happen to lots of brands, The next one I want to talk about is the Playhouse. And the Playhouse I was charged with, when I went to Promotion and Marketing Services, creating a promotion for all the brands, as many brands as we could bring together. We gathered about 40, which was amazing. It was the first group promotion ever in the company. And the theme was everything we developed was everything, house full of values. Well, we needed a premium because I wanted to have people want to buy across divisions, and this was interdivisional, which was rare too at the time. And what do? There was nothing that came to mind. The premium department, the best they could do was the Fisher-Price plastic house. You all have seen that, I'm sure. You had it in your house. It was everywhere. And, all you needed to do was to go to Kmart, the then Target or Walmart of the day, and buy one. So that doesn't work. Well, one night I went home, and 2 children were playing with a case of Pampers. And Jackie, the older, who was about 5, was drawing a gingerbread house on the case. I said, Jackie, keep going. And he drew this, and I took it, I folded it up, and the next day took it into the art department head, Marty Breedy, and said, you need to copy this. And he said, pardon me? And I said, no, you need to copy it. It became the most successful promotion in Procter & Gamble history, and it was from the eyes of a child. And most men wouldn't have done that, taken a child's drawing into. By the same token, when I worked for John on acquisitions and long-term planning, the number one recommendation was beauty care, number two was health care. Those are girl ways to think, frankly. And the number three, which sadly never got pursued, was we bought Orange Crush. John wanted to be in the carbonated business, and we bought Orange Crush with the intention of selling lightly flavored juice drinks and bottled water. The people who took over, the general manager didn't want to do the water. He wanted to attack Coke and Pepsi more directly, so it never got there. But again, that idea came from, I was a mom on the soccer field and saw parents bring in, the little box drinks with 12 teaspoons of sugar and Coke, and I thought, there's got to be a better way, The plan worked. From 1980 to 2000, the revenues quadrupled, and important to the people in this room particularly, the stock outperformed the S&P by a very wide margin. It was 18% annual growth, which is really phenomenal. Along the way, I was asked to give talks, and I developed a talk of how to manage the playroom and the boardroom. And strangely enough, I believe in that talk today. What it did, it was said, take your work skills home and your home skills to work. Your work skills being organization and delegation and discipline and all of that, and the home skills being, love, developing people, caring, character, valuing relationships. And those were kind of separate in those days in a way, because a lot of corporations like to run it with a militaristic, sort of attitude. And you would think if you read this that I ran a very tight household and was very organized as it relates to the dinners, fully nutritious and all of that kind of stuff, and very organized as it relates to what the kids did. And I asked our daughter Missy recently, how would you describe your growing up? And she said, Captain Crunch and chaos. So much for a mom's memory. It worked, having a family and the job, until it didn't. And after working for John and working on the new, acquisitions and long-term strategy for 5 years, it became clear to me that I could no longer do a good job managing the house and working for Procter & Gamble, so I left. And it was hard. I felt Procter & Gamble was my place. I loved it. But you couldn't do both. At least you couldn't do both all at once with 4 children. And so I left. What next? I've done a whole bunch of things since then. We don't need to read all about those, but oh my gosh, it's so good to see you. But applying those same skills that were learned at Procter, you find that you can do almost anything because they teach you how to think, how to organize, how to get things done. And so I've done a lot of stuff. And the 2 philosophies I've had my whole life was, one, start before you're ready. I've always done that. I started a venture capital firm, and this does merit some discussion here, directed toward women-led businesses, because the men weren't investing in women-led businesses, and I got in real trouble because I didn't know what I was doing, and I lost half the money within 2 years. And where is Mike Collette? Where's Mike? Oh, there he is. Until I ran into Mike. And I invested in his company, which was then called On Target, and I think we quadrupled. I think under you quadrupled, but enough money to recoup my entire fund and then make some more. And that was going back to my roots, and due to Mike's generosity, he let me put in a little bit extra now and again. So we ended up outperforming the venture fund, outperforming all the guys, by the way, with that vintage, which was really kind of nice. I founded a nonprofit, a women's leadership group. I had a small role in founding the Alum Association. I was one of a half a dozen board members in the very beginning. They were working really hard and lots of meetings, and I was getting this venture fund off the ground, and I said, I can't do this. I can't meet all this time, and you guys are going to do something great, but I don't have the time for it, and so, but I have an idea. What if I create an advisory board, because we have no credibility today, and an advisory board of well-regarded people that will give us credibility. So my first call was to John Smale, and he liked the idea of an alum group. And he said, let me call John Pepper, and I'll get back to you on Friday. And he called John Pepper, and he called me back on Friday, and he said, John and I would both like to join the board. And John served his whole life, and John Pepper is still on the board. Then I called Meg Whitman. Deal done. You have those three on the advisory board. Everybody wants to be part of it. So that's yesterday. Where is Procter & Gamble today? The last 20 years have not been as productive, revenue-wise, as the period of time I showed you earlier. It's been up and down, and the revenues, I think it's not doubled in 20 years, to be perfectly honest, and let's talk about why. We talk about history, the previous 100 years that ended in the year 2000. There were 9 CEOs with an average tenure of 15 years. And even more important, I could personally tell you the great contribution each one of those made to the company. I mean, you probably could too. I mean, Richard Dupree expanded Tide before it was even test marketed properly and did all the capital expenditures and whatever, which is an enormous risk. He put the whole company at risk. McElroy gave us the brand management system. John Smale gave us growth again. Harness gave us the paper business. And John Pepper reminded us of how important people are, that they're the first priority of the company. Since then, we've had 7 CEOs over 21 years. And that's an average tenure of 3 years. No further comment, other than the innovation level seems to be, from an outsider's perspective, less than it once was. The good news, here's the good news. That list of all the no's that I showed you in the beginning, diversity and inclusion, there's been a ton of progress, and all those no's are now yeses, which is very exciting, and Procter & Gamble has taken a leadership role in that arena. And I'm personally proud of that, having been a little bit of a starter. Tomorrow, just a word or two about tomorrow. Will growth return to revenues? I think we're going to ask Erica and some about that. Will the likes of Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Richard Branson get a shot at employment? When you think about it, that seems sort of outlandish, but I was as much of an outlaw at my time as they were, and the people who were leading the company, we'll give it a try. We'll see if it works. Will research focus on technology, robotics, artificial intelligence, and saving the planet? Or will we be limited to the same old thing? Will a woman be the next CEO? And will she be a rule breaker? Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I'm so glad you're here. Do you have any questions?
Are we allowed to clap for Mike Collette even though he's a guy?
Yes. Well, people ask me about that. How can you invest in Mike? Because he's a guy. I said, because I want to make money.
So I'll ask the first question. So the interesting thing is you talk about the lack of innovation. You look at things like Dollar Shave Club and Buff City Soap and a lot of these. It's really interesting. There's all this innovation that's happening in the CPG world, but it's all happening sort of external to P. Like, why do you think that is?
I don't really have the answer to that. It seems to me, I will read you one thing that I brought, that brochure that I showed you in the very beginning that was just for men. It was really beautifully written, and it said at the end, we specialize in development by providing 3 essential elements: an environment for growth, encouragement to grow, and a new place to grow into. And unless you have those 3, you're not going to get your best people, and you're not going to innovate in exactly the same way. And so I do think that the huge mistake of selling off a good bit of the company. But more than that, they started focusing only on big brands and forgot the fact that Cascade was 2% penetration when they introduced Cascade. Pampers was nowhere. I mean, 0% penetration. And, you know, so some of their focus on big billion-dollar brands, they're not attacking the ones that would grow over time. You can't just go grab a billion-dollar brand. They tried it with Gillette. And I don't think the results have been that positive. Yeah.
What do you see as the biggest challenge for the Gen Y, Gen X, the future generations, in terms of how it impacts our business due to climate change?
Oh, wow. So what is the biggest challenge to the young generation relative to climate change?
And also the P&G business.
Oh, I think the risk to the P&G business is huge, because I think climate change and taking steps against it is extremely important to the young people, as well as it should. And any company whose products are sold in plastic, or are heavy to transport, there's just lots of challenges naturally there. But if they don't solve those, it'll be a company that doesn't appeal to the younger generation. And I think they have to change the focus. I mean, what's wrong with waterless washing machines, making the machines? I don't know what they have to do. Do you want Swiffer, or do you want a robotic vacuum and mop? I don't want to be pushed. I mean, Swiffer is a great advancement, don't get me wrong, but in 10 or 20 years, that's not going to cut it. They need real innovation. And I don't know if you want to weigh in here, Erica, but that's what I think they need. And that is very important to appeal to young people.
Do you think you would still be at P&G, or would you have finished your career there if you were hired today?
If I were hired today, I think that, the question is, would I still be at P&G? I don't know that P&G would have tolerated my rule-breaking approach. I don't. And if they didn't, I wouldn't have stayed. And I just don't know. But I worry about that, because it's the rule breakers are the ones that make the progress, real progress, and the administrators, sort of keep the ship afloat. And you got to have both.
They're the ones that lead today. The rule breakers and the disruptors
Yep.
are the ones that lead.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, what do you think, Ann? I mean, you haven't been gone all that long, or Pete?
I haven't been gone long, and I've consulted back into problems.
Right.
And so I perhaps have a unique inside-outside perspective. And I think that Procter doesn't think big enough. Procter is not willing to take enough risk. Procter doesn't give enough of a niche to people to fail. And there's a lot of big talk about failing fast and failing quick and cheaply. And I don't see enough of it. There are pockets of it, but I don't see enough of it.
That's a good point. They took huge, huge risk in the early days, and huge risk when I was there. I mean, John Smale, when he took over, was buying companies left and right. He didn't spend a ton of money for them. They were relatively small, but we bought, I don't know, a dozen companies in about 4 years. And some worked and some didn't. And nobody talks about, like, the orange juice business that didn't work. They just don't talk about it. But you don't see, and I don't know if they've done the same thing, but you can't buy a $51 billion Gillette and have it not work. So you have to experiment at a different level. But yeah, they probably need a lesson in risk-taking.
Okay, so your performance was clearly exceptional. Like, there were all these, fantastic examples. And yet, like, we're going to lunch, like, and you didn't, how did you develop, what is that other side, like, advocacy and, like, people who are like, I'm going to pull her up, she's going to be the one, like, because, the
Yeah.
not enough.
Yeah.
And you clearly have an image for like a woman that's will do you, but like that networking and how did you do that? How did that shift?
In terms of how I developed when nobody took me to lunch, the no lunch thing lasted about a year, and I did start to make friends. I wasn't ostracized my whole life there, and but it was the leadership. It was the leadership where I said, I mean, imagine, they have a policy. It's been there for 100 years that you can't work when you're pregnant, and these were true, by the way, of all Fortune 500 companies. Procter was actually way ahead of the other Fortune 500 companies. When I went on sales training, I would go to stores where the store manager would call in his boss and wait at the door for me to come because they had never seen a girl in the store. I mean, it was that rare. So I did start to, have a social life there. But, the leaders were great. They listened, and just because that we've not done this before is not what governed their decisions. And I think that's what made all the difference. Yes?
Hey, Peg, let me
No, wait a minute.
clarify.
Wait, okay.
He's the boss.
He's the boss? No, wait a minute. Wait just a minute here. Okay, Mike. Oh.
When you refer to leaders, just to clarify, maybe this is obvious, you're talking about the supreme leaders at the very top. Basically, Tom Lako, John Pepper, and John Smale. And then it drops off pretty dramatically, and there are a bunch of people below them.
No.
who were
There were some, yes, some small-minded, we had our share of small-minded people and bad boys and all that kind of stuff. But there was much more of a culture of acceptance. I remember, that yes, it was definitely true at the high levels, but I could say, Charlie Ferguson or Sandy Weiner or Herzkovitz. I mean, they were tons of them. And if I held my own list, I could, that were willing to think about new things. A lot of the men didn't want to work for me because I was a girl. But a lot of them, were fine with that, or were willing to try. There was a different attitude. And I remember when I went on sales training, that was real revolutionary. If you thought Procter was tough, that was a militaristic organization run by, for the most part, ex-military people. And they didn't want women around at all. Well, I went there, and they assigned me to a 60-year-old gentleman named Al, and he was supposed to train me, because they were also afraid of a woman alone with a man in the field. And I sold for 2 months, and I did a terrible job. And one day, this guy named Steve Ferris, who was 6'6", ex-Marine, he's in that picture, I'll never forget him, he called me up, and he didn't like me being there in the beginning at all, but he said, this doesn't make sense. You should be doing much better than this. So he took me to the store, and we went to the store, and I said, the store manager came up to me right away and said, what can I do for you today, Peggy? And I said, well, nothing right now. I have to go check the shelves and build this kind of stuff. And afterwards, Steve called me over and said, don't you ever do that again. You got his attention. You work it. And, but there were people like that. It was part of the culture that you could be more open, that I don't know if it is so much today. Mainly the leaders, you're right, but there was a lot of them. And they were terrific. Well, I don't want to keep you from your drinks. But I brought some books and to give away to people who would like them. And they're in this box. I just didn't do it. I mean, it was like, the other phrase, aside from start before you're ready, the other phrase I really came to rely upon is I can do that. And sometimes I really struggled, and had to work twice as hard. I always had to work harder than other people, by the way. I worked harder by far than the vast majority of the guys that I worked with. And I never objected to that, because if a group who has control is doing a really good job, why would they let it in an outsider? Somebody who doesn't look or act like them. They don't need you. So they have to want me, and so I have to do a better job. So I don't know, other than to say it was a lot of work, and I just wouldn't accept no. I still don't.
I mean, this is obviously a P&G crowd, but we're all alums, so we're left to have are pursuing different things. I mean, I think some of your after P&G experience is just as interesting as just that I think it was particularly interesting as a woman who sees this with peers, that when you tried to get back in the workforce, people said, oh, why don't you start volunteering? It'll showcase your abilities, and you were.
Oh, that was really hard.
I mean, talk a little bit about that and just how you got back in.
After I left P&G, I was a full-time mom, mostly. My daughter says I was a full-time mom for a nanosecond, but it was a little bit more than that. And then after 5 or 6 years, though, I thought, I'm really ready to get back. I don't want to lean on the kids. I want my own thing. And so I went to Tom Lako, who was vice chair at the time, and he had been a mentor, a big mentor of mine. And I told him I was ready to go back. And I kind of half thought, maybe half hoped, beyond hope, that he'd ask me to come back. And that wasn't the way anybody thought then, so that wasn't going to happen. But at the very least, he might recommend me, some ideas or something. And he sat there and he said, I think you should do volunteer work. Get back into the swing of things. He meant well, because he, be visible so people know you're around. But I sat there and thought it was like a punch in the stomach. If it were Jack across from him, he would never have said that. And so, but that he wasn't alone. We had an old book back then, an alum book, and had everybody's name in it. And I wrote letters to every single one of those people and got 0 responses, not one single response. I said, I'm back, I'm ready to consult, and whatever. I had a lot of offers, by the way, right out the door at P&G, but this was 5 years later, and they thought, you're brain dead, you're a mom. And so I thought the only thing I can do is, no matter what anybody suggests, I'm going to say, I can do that. And so the retail store, the first friend said, I'm going to do a secondhand clothing store. And I said, I can do that. And I sat on the floor labeling little boys' pants and thought, don't know what God meant for me, but not this. And then somebody said, I'm going to get a real estate license. So I thought, I can do that. And then John Smale's daughter said, John told me that she had a crazy idea about flipping houses. And I said, I can do that. And then somebody wanted to consult finally. And I said, I can do that. So it just morphed. I kept saying that. And eventually I had 4 or 5 jobs and more than I could handle. But I think that attitude is really good. And it's important to know if there are mothers or people who take extended leaves, it could be dads down too, that when you start to go back, it's hard. It's almost harder in the beginning because you're older and they think you're out of touch. And in a high-tech world, they're really going to think you're out of touch. Yes, John.
One of our brothers, so to speak, Van Hudson, did hire you and when he was CEO of US Shoe.
Yeah.
So how did that come about? What were those circumstances that somebody brought you in?
Well, Dean Butler, who used to work for me, Van bought LensCrafters. And so Dean recommended. And I was so eager for work, I wrote a proposal that I would work for 6 months and I would charge $25,000. And I basically would work full time. And I got turned down. They did an interview process. It was to revive a small chain of shoe stores. And he wrote me a letter and said, we did a lot of research. Everybody thinks you're great references, but we're going to hire an expert in the shoe industry. And I wrote him back and I said, good luck hiring an expert in a failing industry. And that was the end. But that speaks to my point. I never put the two together, but about being an independent thinker, because suddenly I was very valuable. I was going to bring new thinking to him. So he asked for another proposal on Capizio. So I said 3 months, part-time, $75,000, and he said, yes, yes, ma'am. That was good.
Okay.
Yes.
So for as long as I've known you, and that's post your P&G experience, you've always talked about a vision of Cincinnati cultivating a secondary market of brands. Brands that don't have $500 million thresholds, but that could build on the strength of the talent base here. And I was wondering if you could comment on that, and also comment on whether you think that is a unique opportunity for female leaders of the future in this region.
To build brands here?
Yeah.
I do. I definitely do. because, and I think P&G could partner with men or women, but probably particularly women, and I think it would be a very smart thing to do. When Procter got into the business of selling things like Sunny Delight, I thought, they're not doing it like an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur would sell 51%, hold 49%, because the cash didn't make all that much difference to Procter. And if this entrepreneur could make it work, then I could buy it back at half price, right? There's things like that require, you almost have to be on the outside to understand that there are other deals, other ways of doing things that people don't think. But I think that's a very good idea. And there's just a lot of talent here. And with small seed money, they could do wonderful stuff. Small amount. You can't think just straight, And you have to think at the end of the road. A lot of people think this month, next month, a quarter. That doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. Okay, Meredith, I've offered.
No, I'm going to keep asking.
Oh,
So,
well, if anybody wants to get a drink or.
No, we want to keep hearing from you just a little bit longer.
Okay.
So, and anyone else, feel free to jump in. One of the other questions that I had been thinking about was just, I thought it was interesting to hear about your partnership with Jack and how you both had these high-powered careers at the same time and then still raised these 4 children. And maybe just because of the life phase I'm in, I'm interested in that too. But I think that's going to be interesting for people who are listening to this as well.
Well, Jack, I'll tell you about Jack. I dedicate the book to Jack, and his contribution was to Jack, our Secretary of State, Captain of Fun, and my cheerleader. And and that's Jack. And I'm the person who pays the taxes and keeps Jack out of jail. And so it is a partnership of very different people. We went on a trip a couple of days ago, and I was taking a few people to go down to Sea Island, and it was business because we're going to renovate our house or something like that. First thing Jack does is have a cocktail party. And I said, Jack, this is a business trip, but we're great partners in that regard. And you're right, it's been almost 50 years, so.
That's only a half century.
Cheers. Yeah. Did I answer?
So I'll ask.
Yeah. You were at the cocktail party.
Can I go down?
Yeah, he was at the cocktail party.
I was at
How
the
do you like that
cocktail
cocktail
party.
party, by the way?
It was a great cocktail party. They do a great job, and it was really fun to see.
Did you know
He
that I was 100% the driver of the party? Did you realize that you had so much fun because of me?
I didn't realize that. So I would say, looking at the slides you had up here earlier, I would say you're arguably more successful after P&G. Do you attribute that to having worked for P&G, or could you have done that working for Unilever or Pick Somebody?
No, I attribute it to P&G. P&G is a great teacher, and they teach you skills that almost can't be duplicated anywhere else, which is why they have such a great alum association. It's why so many companies outside are run by P&G people. And I did have the experience when I left. I ended up working for always CEOs, the CEO of Sara Lee and Bristol Myers and Ralston, and doing strategic planning and acquisition like I had with John, and a bunch of other companies. Nowhere did I ever see the same level of talent or ethics as we're at P&G. And so I think it's quite unique in that regard. And when I started doing everything, I applied all those skills. The first house I built, I developed a fact book which could have run Tide. And it kept people on schedule and all that kind of stuff. So it's very, very important. Our oldest child worked for Procter for 3 years, I think. And he's a squash coach at the University of Pennsylvania, but I think that the skills he learned there are invaluable, They're all invaluable.
Yeah, I agree. I would agree.
Good. All right.
I think it's interesting that you referenced ethics,
Yes.
which a group like this might not touch upon because we assume it or it's not necessarily directly in front of us.
Right.
But I've listened, of course, to everything you've ever told me. And you have so frequently discussed ethics because you're maniacal about the subject.
Yep.
So you've discussed how you've not found it anyplace else, which you obviously just referenced with respect to some bigger companies. But it's really broader than that, or you might say deeper than that, the ethics that are instilled in people at P&G. And let's assume they have it to begin with, but P&G drills it down and helps create a framework for people to be ethical in what they do.
I think that's right, and my experience there was they didn't tolerate the lack thereof. You know, I had at least one experience with removing somebody from the premises the day that they learned something. But yes, they're very firm on that, and I think still are, and I think it's really wonderful. They stand for something, and it goes back 150 or however many years, and has been pretty true from the very beginning. It's something we all in Cincinnati and this organization should be very proud of. And it does trump revenues, by the way. Maybe not the S&P performance, but revenues. Because they really try to do the right thing, I think, all the time. And I think all of us are instilled with that. And so that's a good question. Okay, Meredith and Stuart, don't you think it's time for a...
What's
Yeah.
the best decision that you've made?
A good question. And interesting, given what I just said, leaving Procter & Gamble. I loved every minute of it. It was hard for me. I knew I would never again work for people of that caliber and never again so challenged. But I faced two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and it was my career and my family. And, I couldn't be more proud of where those children have gone and what they do. And with all due respect to Jack, I spent more time with them. You can't both be working. I mean, at least with 4 kids. So I look back and I say, thank God I made that choice.
Any parting advice to women, how women can help each other as we progress through our careers?
That's also a very good question. Yes, I think we have to push the envelope. I think we have to take risk. I gave a talk at an alum association a while ago. The national one. Margaret, you were in charge of that, I think. And, where I said women should exaggerate your talents, exaggerate your skills, exaggerate your prospects, your revenues if you're starting a company, your profits, because the guys do. And they do, and if you hold back. But I think women they need to take more, they need to do that, and they need to take more risk. I mean, I bought my first building. I know, Pete, you have been very involved in Over the Rhine. I bought my first building in Over the Rhine in 1994. The same year, it was declared the highest crime rate in the United States. It didn't bother me at all, and I will end on this story. Coming out of the building, the first building, I had Jack and 2 bankers, and the 2 bankers said to me, because we looked across the street, and there was 2 guys shooting heroin right in front of God and everyone. And the bankers, who were very nervous about being in this area and coming out of this building where there were a couple of crazy people, Dan said to me, Peg, just so you know, I'm not going to give you any money to buy this building. And then Jack on the other side said, Peg, just so you know, I'm not going to give you any money either. And I thought for a minute and said, it's a damn good thing, gentlemen, I don't need your money. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Thank you very much.